The night sky above the Baltic Sea was deceptively calm. Cold winds carried the distant echo of waves, but beneath the silence, an invisible storm was brewing. For months, NATO had boasted of its supremacy in the region, deploying fleets, stealth fighters, and state-of-the-art drones. They thought they were untouchable, but they never expected that a single machine, the Swedish JAS-39 Gripen, could tilt the balance of power. It all began when intelligence reports reached Stockholm. A secret NATO exercise was scheduled, one that would test their newest air defense systems. Their aim was simple: to demonstrate overwhelming dominance. Yet in their arrogance, they ignored a simple truth. Technology alone does not win wars. Strategy does. Sweden's high command saw the exercise not as a threat, but as an opportunity. The Gripen, often underestimated by Western analysts, was about to prove its worth. Light, fast, and built for electronic warfare, the jet was nicknamed the Ghost of the North by its pilots. Its compact design masked a deadly versatility. Where NATO's aircraft needed massive logistics, Gripen thrived on efficiency. Captain Elias Norberg, a veteran pilot with ice in his veins, was chosen for the mission. He was calm, precise, and carried the kind of quiet confidence that unnerved his opponents. On the eve of the operation, he simply said to his crew, "They think size is strength. Tonight, we show them otherwise." As dawn approached, NATO's fleet spread across the sea. Massive F-35s roared overhead, AWACS aircraft scanned the skies, and destroyers stood ready with missile defenses. Their commanders laughed at the idea that anyone could breach their shield. But far from the battlefield, the Gripen was already in motion. Flying low across the tree line, Elias relied on the aircraft's cutting-edge data link. Unlike NATO's heavy communication systems, Gripen's network could seamlessly connect with ground radars and drones, creating a silent web of information. Every move NATO made was already mapped in Elias's cockpit. Then came the strike. With a flick of a switch, the Gripen unleashed its electronic warfare suite. NATO's radars, proud and powerful, suddenly lit up with false signals. Ghost fighters appeared on their screens. Targets multiplied, disappeared, and reappeared. Confusion spread like wildfire. "Multiple bogies detected," one operator shouted. "No, wait, signal lost," yelled another. Within minutes, NATO's billion-dollar defense grid had been reduced to chaos. While the alliance scrambled, Elias pressed forward. His Gripen carried Meteor missiles, weapons designed to outrun and outthink anything NATO had in the air. One by one, enemy fighters scrambled to intercept, only to find themselves locked onto from impossible ranges. By the time they realized what had happened, it was already too late. The missiles screamed across the sky, tearing through formations like invisible predators. Down below, NATO ships tried to react, but Gripen's agility made it untouchable. Flying barely above the waves, it dodged radar locks and delivered precision strikes. Elias wasn't there to destroy everything. He was there to humiliate them. Every maneuver was a message. Your power means nothing here. Panic gripped NATO's command centers. They had trained for full-scale wars, cyber attacks, even nuclear scenarios. But not for this. Not for a lone jet dancing in and out of their defenses, making their billion-dollar systems look like toys. And then, as suddenly as it began, the Gripen vanished. NATO radars cleared, skies went silent, and the Alliance was left staring at empty screens. Their fleets were intact, but their pride was shattered. Commanders knew that if this had been war, Entire divisions would have been wiped out before they even understood the battle had begun. Back in Stockholm, Captain Elias landed to a silent runway. No applause, no celebration. Only the quiet acknowledgement of history being made. Sweden hadn't just tested a jet. They had tested the very foundation of NATO's belief in its superiority. And NATO had failed. But this was only the beginning. The exercise had been a warning. The world had just witnessed the dawn of a new kind of warfare, and whispers spread through every capital. If one Gripen could bring NATO to its knees, what could an entire fleet do? The storm was far from over. The silence after the storm was heavier than the roar of battle itself. In Brussels, NATO commanders sat in disbelief. Every sensor, every radar, every fighter jet they trusted had been deceived by a single Swedish aircraft. They had not lost ships or men, but something far more devastating: their aura of invincibility. "What just happened out there?" demanded General Wright, slamming his fist on the table. Reports flooded in. Ghost targets, missiles striking before radar lock, fleets blinded for precious minutes. The conclusion was unavoidable. NATO's billion-dollar network had been humbled by a jet NATO once dismissed as lightweight. Far to the north, Sweden's defense ministry kept the mission under wraps. Officially, it was just an exercise. But behind closed doors, leaders understood its magnitude. The Gripen had not only exposed NATO's flaws, it had rewritten the rulebook of modern air warfare. Strategy, not size, had triumphed. Captain Elias Norberg, the man who had flown into NATO's heart, found himself at the center of history. Yet he carried no pride on his shoulders, only clarity. In his debriefing, he spoke simply. They built an empire of steel and numbers. We built a weapon of speed and adaptability. Tonight, the empire blinked, but NATO was not about to stay silent. Within hours, Allied commanders launched a counter-exercise, deploying F-35s in swarms, backed by electronic countermeasures. Their plan was simple: overwhelm the Gripen with brute force. Yet what they failed to grasp was that Elias and his aircraft thrived in chaos. The second confrontation came at twilight. NATO jets filled the skies, painting the horizon with contrails. Elias flew alone once more, but this time his data link connected him to an invisible army. Drones, coastal radars, even submarines feeding him live intel. To NATO, it looked like one jet. In reality, it was an entire ecosystem compressed into a single cockpit. The battle was swift and merciless. Meteor missiles sliced through formations before F-35s could respond. Electronic jamming blinded AWACS aircraft, turning their billion-dollar eyes into darkness. NATO pilots found themselves chasing shadows, firing at phantoms, and retreating in panic as the Gripen struck with surgical precision. In just 20 minutes, the exercise had collapsed into a rout. Once again, Elias pulled back before destruction was total. He did not need to win with firepower. He was winning with humiliation. The psychological shock rippled across the alliance. Soldiers whispered about the ghost of the North. Analysts questioned decades of doctrine. If a single Gripen could tear holes in NATO's defenses, what chance did they stand against a coordinated fleet? The alliance had never feared Sweden before. Now, they could not ignore it. Meanwhile, in Stockholm, political leaders faced a storm of their own. Sweden had never sought domination, only defense. But the world was watching, and powers from Moscow to Washington scrambled to interpret what the Gripen's success meant. For the first time in decades, the balance of power felt uncertain. Journalists called it the night NATO fell. In military academies, the event was studied as the Gripen Gambit, and for NATO itself, it became a scar, a reminder that even giants can stumble before the nimblest of opponents. As for Captain Elias, he disappeared from the spotlight. No parades, no interviews. He returned to his squadron quietly, content with anonymity. But in the minds of his fellow pilots, he had become legend, a man who flew into the jaws of a superpower and proved that courage and cunning could outweigh sheer might. In the end, the Gripen's victory was not measured in ships sunk or jets destroyed, but in the silence that followed. NATO had been shaken to its core, forced to rethink everything it believed about air dominance. And Sweden, a nation often overlooked, had shown the world that sometimes the sharpest blade is the one no one expects. The storm faded into history, but its echo remained. Because from that day forward, every NATO pilot who took to the skies carried a shadow in the back of his mind. A whisper that said, "Beware the ghost of the North."